For months, Brad, Kyle, and Trent pushed the line, mocking Amina Taylor, taunting her in the hallways, turning her wheelchair into the punchline of a joke no one dared to stop. She was an easy target, a black girl, newly disabled, surrounded by people who stayed quiet. They crossed the line more than once. And then one day, they didn't just cross it, they shattered it. But what they didn't know was that someone had been watching. Zariah Taylor was Amina's older sister, and an MMA fighter with no tolerance for cruelty and no fear of consequences. What happened next couldn't be buried. They thought they could get away with it, but Zariah wasn't going to let them, not without making them suffer the same way they made her disabled sister suffer. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The hallways had never felt longer than they did now. Amina Taylor used to weave through them like everyone else, slipping between bodies, shoulders back, head high, her earbuds tucked in and her mind already halfway home. But that version of her, the girl who could outrun the clock and take stairs 2 at a time, was gone. What remained moved slower now, smaller, quieter, tucked low in a wheelchair that creaked a little when she turned corners, a chair she was still learning to trust, even though it was all she had. Students passed her like she didn't exist, or worse, like she was something to pity. Eyes dropped when she looked up, conversation stopped when she wheeled too close. And though no one said it out loud, Amina felt it in every sideways glance and forced smile that she didn't belong in the flow anymore. She was in the way, in the middle of someone else's space, in the middle of a life that had moved on without her. Only Zariah never made her feel that way. Her sister was in the grade above, but she walked Amina to class when she could, doubled back during lunch, and kept a quiet eye from across the courtyard when they weren't together. She didn't say much, Zariah never did, but when she looked at Amina, it was like everything was still okay. Like Amina was still who she used to be, even if the rest of the world refused to see it. They'd always been close, but since the accident, that closeness had turned into something else entirely. Something that carried weight. Something with fire in it. Zariah had been there when Amina came home from the hospital, saw her cry in the middle of the night when the reality settled in, helped her up the first time she fell out of the chair, held her hand through the silence that came after the pity faded and the whispers started. She never made a show of protecting her sister, but everyone knew not to test that line. At least, most people did. There were others, ones who watched Amina a little too closely when Zariah wasn't around, ones who saw the chair not as a boundary to respect, but an opening to exploit. Brad, Kyle, and Trent weren't new faces. They had been cruel before the accident, but back then it was surface-level taunts, background noise that never stuck because Amina could walk away. Now she couldn't walk at all, and that had changed the game. They hadn't come full force yet, but their presence had grown louder lately. They lurked behind lockers. They snickered when she passed. Kyle once brushed past her wheel and whispered, "You look better sitting down anyway." Brad had dropped a crumpled napkin in her lap one morning and smirked like it was the funniest thing in the world. No one stopped them. No one even looked. Amina didn't tell Zariah, not because she didn't want to, but because she already knew what Zariah would do, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Her sister's temper wasn't wild or loud, but when it broke like steel. Clean. Final. Zariah had never been suspended in her life, but there was a quiet edge to her that made people think twice. Still, Amina wasn't ready to be the reason her sister crossed that line, so she stayed silent. And each day, the silence made her smaller. Most mornings blurred together now. Wake up early, struggle through the routine, ride quietly with Zariah to school, and brace herself for what the day might bring. There was no rhythm to it. Not anymore. Just moments stitched together by effort. Each one survived, but never easy. It wasn't that Amina had no friends. She used to have plenty. But since the accident, they had slipped away, some fast and some slow, like water draining through cracks she hadn't known were there. The girls she used to laugh with at lunch now offered her soft looks from across the room, the kind people gave when they didn't know what to say and didn't want to say the wrong thing. A few texted her after she came back. Most didn't. No one said anything cruel to her face, but no one stood between her and the ones who did either. And lately, Brad and his friends had stopped pretending. It started with the names: Wheels, Pity Case, Floor Crawler. They tossed them like darts in the hallway, always just loud enough to catch her ear, but quiet enough that no teacher could be sure. They'd brush too close behind her chair, slap the backrest like it was a joke, or bump the foot pedals with their shoes so the whole frame jolted forward. One time, Trent pretended to trip and sent her backpack skidding across the floor, then made a big show of laughing when she had to ask someone else to pick it up. No one helped. No one even asked if she was okay. She'd learned not to cry at school, at least not where they could see her, but the shame settled into her chest like a stone. Zariah could sense something was off, even though Amina said nothing. Her older sister's eyes would linger longer at the cafeteria door, scanning for any sign of tension. She watched who stood near Amina's locker. She noticed how her sister held her arms tighter around herself, and how her answers came shorter, with less and less of the warmth she used to have. But Zariah didn't push, not yet. She gave Amina space, assuming she'd speak when she was ready. Then came the assembly. It was one of those mandatory events where the entire school squeezed into the gym, rows of folding chairs lined up across the polished hardwood. The smell of sweat and dust clinging to the air, no matter how clean the place looked. Amina didn't mind assemblies. They gave her a chance to blend in, to sit quietly without being noticed. But this one had a different tone. It was Patriot Day, a proud annual display where veterans spoke, flags were waved, and the student body stood hand on heart, while the national anthem echoed through the speakers. Zariah had found her a seat near the front, before leaving to join her own grade section. Amina sat in silence, her chair locked, hands resting on her lap. She watched the microphone hum with static as a vice principal introduced the guest speaker, then nodded along as the gym quieted and the first notes of the anthem began. People stood around her like a tide rising. She stayed seated. It wasn't that she meant anything by it. She couldn't stand. But in that moment, all that mattered was how obvious it looked. Her head dipped, eyes staring down at her shoes as she tried to disappear into the seat. But it was too late. She'd already been seen. Brad's voice cut through the silence like a scratch on glass. "Oh, no respect for the flag," he said, loud enough for heads to turn. "Come on, you could at least try to stand up." Laughter snuck in around the anthem's final notes. A few boys near the back chuckled. A teacher frowned, but did nothing. The music kept playing. The flag kept waving. Amina sat frozen. Kyle joined in. Maybe she just doesn't believe in America. Or maybe she's just lazy. More laughter, louder now. Brad cupped his hands around his mouth like he was leading a chant. "Stand up, stand up, stand up." And with every word, her face burned hotter, her chest tightened harder, until the tears pushed forward, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. She bit her lip, clenched her hands into fists on her lap, and kept her head down, hoping no one would notice. But they always did. Someone snapped a photo. Someone else whispered something cruel behind her back. The anthem ended, and as everyone sat, the sound of her quiet sobs was just loud enough to carry. She didn't remember much of what the speaker said after that. She didn't look up. She didn't move. She just waited for the assembly to end, for the chairs to scrape back, for Zariah to return. And when she did, Zariah took one look at Amina's red eyes and trembling shoulders, and didn't ask what happened. She just knelt beside the wheelchair and held her hand the entire walk back to class. but her jaw was clenched the whole way. And behind her eyes, something sharp had started to take shape. Zariah didn't let go of Amina's hand the rest of the day, not even when she dropped her off at her last class. She stood just outside the doorway, arms crossed, jaw locked, her eyes scanning every student who passed like she was memorizing faces. When the final bell rang, she wheeled her sister to the car herself, skipping practice and brushing off texts with one-word replies. The silence between them on the ride home wasn't heavy. It was loaded. Amina stared out the window, her fingers curled around the strap of her backpack, watching the houses blur into a quiet stretch of road. The sun was already low, throwing long shadows across the dash. Zariah hadn't turned the radio on. She didn't ask how the rest of the day went. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping slowly against her thigh. When they pulled into the driveway, Zariah didn't go inside. She popped the trunk, grabbed the ramp from the back, and unfolded it carefully. Amina waited until it was in place before rolling herself down, not saying a word. She tried to head toward the front steps, but Zariah stepped in front of her. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice calm, too calm, the kind of calm that felt like the edge of a storm. Amina didn't answer. She didn't look up either. Zariah crouched beside the chair, blocking her path, her expression unreadable, but her eyes locked in. "You're crying in front of a gym full of people, and you expect me not to ask?" Amina shook her head slowly. "It was nothing." Zariah didn't move. "Don't do that. I said it's fine," Amina muttered, but the words didn't carry any strength behind them. Zariah leaned in closer. "You think I didn't see your face after that assembly? You think I didn't hear them laughing?" Amina flinched. "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does," Zariah said, her voice tightening. "It matters if someone's hurting you. It matters if you're walking around holding it all in while they get to pretend like nothing happened." Amina looked away. Her fingers were trembling now. "You can't fix everything." "I know that," Zariah replied. "But I can fix this. If you just tell me who—" "No," Amina cut in, sharper than she meant to. "Because if I tell you, you're going to lose it. You're going to get in trouble. And then I'll be alone." The words came out fast, and once they did, she hated how small they made her sound. But it was true. The fear of being without her sister, of sitting alone in that building, while those same boys laughed behind her back and pushed her chair for fun, it was heavier than anything else she carried. Zariah had always been the shield. Without her, there was no protection. There was just her, and the silence, and the chair. Zariah didn't answer right away. She stood slowly, jaw tight, arms folding across her chest as she looked down at her sister. The frustration on her face wasn't aimed at Amina, it was directed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far away, but coming closer every day. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly, not as a promise, but as a statement carved from stone. "But you can't keep this to yourself. It's not safe." Amina nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was just a way to end the conversation. Zariah stepped aside and let her through. She watched as Amina struggled with the front door, the ramp just a little too steep, the wheels slipping once before she caught herself. Zariah didn't help this time. She just stood there and watched, her heart pulled tight, her fists curled slightly at her sides. She knew her sister was hiding something. And whatever it was getting worse. That night, Amina didn't eat much. She picked at her dinner and left half of it on the plate. Zariah stayed up late, sitting in her room with the lights off, phone face down on the bed, staring at nothing. She wasn't angry at Amina. She was angry at what the world had done to her, at how quickly people had changed when her sister stopped walking, at how easy it was for cruelty to slip into the cracks and hide there, just out of reach. But Zariah wasn't going to let it hide much longer. Whether Amina told her or not, she was going to find out. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the kind of chill that clung to the skin long after the wind had passed, and Amina rolled herself across the side entrance near the gym, while most students filtered in through the front. It was a habit now, avoiding the larger crowds, the shoulder bumps, the awkward pity stares. The side door was quieter, less chance of running into anyone who'd make her day worse. Or so she thought. She made it to her locker, spinning the dial carefully, her fingers stiff from the cold. The hallway was still half empty, filled with the low echo of shoes and murmurs bouncing off the walls. She thought she'd make it through this morning without incident. Zariah was already inside, handling something for student council, but she was supposed to meet her before second period. Amina had told herself she'd be fine. It was just 1 hour, one hallway, one morning. She didn't hear them coming. The first sign was the sound of laughter. Low at first, then rising like a wave just before it breaks. She didn't even have time to react before Brad's hand slapped the back of her chair. "Hey, there she is. Captain, sit down," he said, smirking as he leaned over her shoulder. Amina tensed. Her hand froze on the lock. She kept her eyes down, hoping if she didn't engage, they'd go away. But they didn't. Kyle stepped in front of her, walking backward as she rolled forward. "Where's your flag pin, huh? Thought you'd come in with a protest sign today," he said, flashing a wide, mocking grin. "Or maybe a wheelchair bumper sticker that says, 'Down with America'?" Trent laughed from behind. "Nah, she's too lazy to print one out. Besides, she'd have to get up to do that." More laughter. Amina tried to swerve around Kyle, but he stepped to the side again, blocking her. Brad walked up alongside her and grabbed the right wheel. "Come on, just having some fun," he said, his grip tightening. "This thing's built like a shopping cart. I bet I could pop a wheelie." Amina's chest tightened. "Don't," she said, her voice soft but sharp. "Oh, you hear that?" Trent said. "She's got a voice. Thought you left that in the hospital." Before she could react, Brad unlocked the brake. And then, without warning, they lifted. Her world shifted sideways as the chair jolted beneath her, one of them grabbing the handles from behind, the other pulling at the frame. Her body slid slightly, unbalanced. She gripped the armrests tight, trying to stay steady, but her center of gravity was off. She couldn't fight them. Not like this. They weren't laughing anymore. They were performing now. Kyle yanked the chair fully out from under her. Her legs collapsed instantly, limp and unresponsive, her body hitting the floor hard. The tiles were cold. Her palms scraped as she tried to catch herself. The impact wasn't loud, but it echoed through her chest like thunder. She gasped, her face burning, pain and shame twisting together inside her as the boys cheered. Brad hopped into the wheelchair and spun it in a lazy circle, making car sounds with his mouth. "Vroom, vroom! Out of my way! Cripple coming through!" Kyle leaned against the lockers, filming with his phone. "Yo, this is gold. Amina, you want your seat back? Say, please." She looked up, her arms trembling beneath her, her knees useless on the cold tile. "Give it back," she said, but it came out cracked, thin, like air that didn't have strength behind it. Trent nudged the chair with his foot. "She can't even crawl right. Maybe we should race her down the hall." They kept laughing. People started to gather. A few watched, unsure if it was a joke or something worse. Most turned and walked faster. Amina's heart raced. Her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to grab the chair, to run. But she couldn't do any of it. She wasn't fast. She wasn't strong. And in that moment, on the ground, with her elbows burning and her stomach twisted in panic, she wasn't even seen. She was just something to point at. Brad leaned back in the chair, spinning it again. "I got to admit," he said, laughing, "it's kind of fun being you." And that was when the noise stopped. Not because they were done, but because someone else had arrived. Footsteps echoed from the end of the hall, heavy and fast, cutting through the scene like a blade. The students who had stopped to watch began backing away, their laughter dying quickly. The chair squeaked to a stop as Brad turned toward the sound. And there she was. Zariah. She wasn't running. She didn't need to. She walked down the hall like gravity didn't apply to her, eyes locked on Amina, then shifting to the chair, then finally to the three boys frozen in place. Her face said nothing, but her eyes said everything. And for the first time that morning, Amina breathed. Zariah didn't break stride as she approached. Her steps echoed through the corridor like a warning, each one heavier than the last. The laughter had already died, but the silence it left behind was louder, sharper, filled with a tension that wrapped itself around every student watching from the corners of the hallway. She moved past them like they weren't even there. Her focus was locked dead ahead. Amina was on the floor, her arms shaking as she tried to lift herself, and the chair, her chair, was spinning in lazy circles beneath Brad, who was leaning back like he was still king of something. Kyle stood with his phone raised halfway, no longer recording but still gripping it like he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Trent leaned on a locker, his smirk just beginning to crack. Zariah didn't look confused. She didn't look panicked. She looked calm. Too calm. Brad chuckled nervously when she reached them, trying to climb out of the chair with a weak grin. "Hey, relax. It's just a joke. We were just messing around." Zariah didn't blink. "Get out of her chair." Brad hesitated, his voice trying to sound casual, but his bravado was already thinning. "She was fine, all right? We didn't hurt her or anything. We were giving it back. I said," Zariah repeated, her voice low and even. "Get out of her chair." Kyle stepped forward, trying to fill the space with noise. Nobody touched her. "We didn't even push her that hard." Zariah cut her eyes toward him. "You dropped her on the floor and laughed." Trent scoffed. "She can't feel it anyway, right?" That did it. Zariah's hand moved before anyone could speak. She grabbed Brad by the front of his jacket and yanked him out of the wheelchair so fast his legs tangled beneath him. He stumbled, and before he could find his footing, she slammed him backwards against the lockers with a metallic crash that turned heads down the entire hall. He gasped, but she didn't let go. She drove her knee into his stomach once, hard, and as he doubled over, coughing, she dropped him to the ground. Kyle lunged at her, but she turned on instinct, catching his wrist mid-swing and twisting it behind his back so sharply he screamed. "You touch her again," she hissed, "and I'll break something you do feel," he thrashed, trying to swing with his free hand, but she ducked the wild punch and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard, his head snapping against the tile with a dull thud. He groaned, clutching his shoulder, but she was already turning. Trent charged at her from the side, yelling, trying to grab her in a full tackle. Zariah barely stepped back in time. His momentum sent them both stumbling. They crashed into a row of lockers, the sound booming like thunder. She twisted, trying to break free, but he had a grip on her hoodie now, dragging her sideways. "You think you're tough?" he barked. "You think you can come in here and—" She drove her elbow into his ribs once, then again, and when his arms loosened, she spun, grabbing the front of his shirt and throwing him across the hallway. He hit the ground hard, rolling once before slamming into the base of a trophy case. Glass cracked. A cheerleader's photo inside the frame rattled loose. By now, students had backed far away, but no one had left. No teachers had arrived. Phones were out again, not to stop the fight, but to capture every second of it. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was something else entirely. Something that had been building for days, weeks, maybe even longer. Zariah's chest rose and fell fast, her fists still clenched as she took in the scene. Kyle wheezing on the floor, clutching his wrist. Trent groaning by the broken glass. Brad crawling toward a backpack, spitting curses under his breath. "You're gonna regret this," he snarled. "You think just 'cause you can throw a punch." Zariah walked toward him slowly. "I'm not throwing punches," she said flatly. "I'm delivering consequences." He lunged from the floor, trying to surprise her with a blind tackle, but she sidestepped it, grabbing his arm mid-motion and twisting him mid-air. He crashed down on his side with a pained yell. She didn't stop. She grabbed the back of his jacket and dragged him a few feet like he weighed nothing, tossing him hard against the lockers again. "This is for pushing her," she said, as he slid down the metal. She kicked his ribs. "This is for laughing." Another kick. "This is for recording it." He tried to speak, but nothing came out. She turned, stepping toward Kyle, who was scrambling up now with a broken look in his eyes. "You want to finish this?" she asked. He shook his head. Too late. She grabbed him and slammed him against the locker next to Brad, then kneed him once, stepped back, and hit him with a clean right hook that sent him slumping. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. Her silence was worse. Her eyes stayed cold. But even she didn't see Trent coming up behind her. And the fight wasn't over yet. Trent rose behind her with blood on his lip and fury in his eyes. He didn't charge this time. He pounced, wrapping both arms around Zariah's waist and yanking her backward with everything he had. She lost her footing, crashing into the ground with him on top, his elbows striking the side of her head in the fall. For a second, everything jarred sideways. Noise, color, movement blurring around her. He tried to pin her arms down, growling through clenched teeth, spitting out curses like they were spitfire. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he snapped. "You're just another thug. Just another—" Zariah twisted under him, forcing her knee between them, gritting through the pressure until she found her angle. She shoved upward, grunting with the effort, then rolled, reversing their position with raw force. Her elbow came down into his jaw once, hard. Then again, snapping his head to the side. She grabbed his shirt and slammed the back of his head into the floor. Once, then twice. The impact echoed, and for a moment, everything else seemed to stop. Blood ran from his mouth now, dark and fast. And when she stood, he didn't follow. Kyle crawled toward a hallway exit, dragging himself across the tile with one arm, his face dazed, his breathing shallow. Brad tried to grab a metal broom from the janitor's bucket someone had left near the lockers, but his hands were shaking too badly. He swung it once, blindly, and the end of the handle clipped Zariah's shoulder. She didn't flinch. She turned, and Brad froze, still crouched, holding the broom like it would save him. Zariah stepped forward and slapped it from his hands so fast it clattered to the floor before he even blinked. She grabbed him by the collar and lifted him halfway off the ground. "You humiliated my sister," she said, her voice low and sharp. "You dragged her out of her chair. You laughed. You recorded it. You let her lie on the floor while you played with the only thing that gives her freedom. You think I'm crazy?" He nodded fast, wide-eyed, tears brimming now. "You're right." She punched him. Not wild. Not unhinged, just one clean hit to the face that snapped his head back and left him limp in her grip. She let go, and he dropped to the floor like a dropped coat. By now, the hallway looked like something out of a riot. Lockers dented, backpacks scattered, blood smeared on the floor, students still circling the edges, phones still raised, mouths covered in disbelief. A few had backed behind the corners, whispering to others down the connecting halls. Some stood frozen with their hands over their mouths. But none of them said a word, and still, not a single adult had arrived. Zariah turned slowly, taking one long breath. Her arms were scraped, her hoodie torn at the shoulder, a trickle of blood near her temple from where Trent had slammed her. She winced as she rolled her neck, her ribs throbbing from the fall, but she stayed upright. Her eyes scanned the hallway once more, as if daring anyone else to speak. No one did. Then she moved to her sister. Amina was still half sitting, half sagging against the lockers. She hadn't cried again. Not yet. But her body was shaking, her eyes locked on the wreckage around her. She'd watched the entire thing. Every punch, every fall, every word. Zariah crouched beside her, her voice soft for the first time. "Come here." Amina didn't speak, but she leaned into her. Zariah's hands were careful as she slid her arms under her sister's back and legs, lifting her slowly off the cold tile, holding her like something precious that had been dropped one too many times. She stepped around the broken glass, the fallen boys, the stairs. The chair sat tipped near the trophy case, one wheel spinning idly. Zariah set Amina down carefully, adjusting the footrests, checking her sleeves, brushing her hair back like she used to when they were little. She didn't ask if she was okay. She knew she wasn't, but she was safe now. That mattered more. The first adult finally appeared at the far end of the hall, running. Zariah didn't look up. She placed one hand on the back of the chair and started pushing. Her knuckles were bruised, her clothes torn, her breath still coming fast. But her grip on that chair? Steady and unshakable. Zariah didn't say anything as she pushed her sister down the hallway. The wreckage of the fight stretched behind them, bodies groaning, lockers dented, blood drying on the tile, but she didn't look back. She didn't check to see who was watching or filming or whispering behind their hands. All that mattered was the weight in the chair and the silence that clung to it. Amina hadn't spoken since the last punch landed. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white, eyes unfocused, shoulders trembling in a way that told Zariah the adrenaline was still fading, that her sister was holding back something she couldn't keep buried for long. Zariah slowed near the end of the hall and leaned over her slightly, crouching beside her again, even though every bruise and muscle screamed not to. She placed a hand gently on Amina's wrist. "Hey," she whispered. "It's over. I'm here." And that was when the wall cracked. Amina's shoulders heaved once, a sharp breath breaking out of her chest as the dam gave way. Her lips curled inward as she tried to stop it. But the tears came too fast, too full. She turned into her sister's arms and buried her face against Zariah's shoulder, clutching the front of her hoodie like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. Zariah held her like she had in the hospital room that first night after the accident, when Amina had woken up screaming, terrified at the stillness in her legs. Held her like she had in the hallway outside the bathroom when a teacher had barked at her for being late, not even noticing she couldn't get the stall door open. Held her like she was trying to shield her from a world that kept forgetting how to treat her like a person. The tears soaked through Zariah's sleeve, hot and sharp. Amina's whole body trembled, and the sound of her crying wasn't loud, but it carried, deep and broken, like something old was being torn open. "I tried," Amina whispered between sobs. "I really tried to ignore it. I thought I could just wait it out." Zariah didn't say, "I know." She didn't say, "It's okay." She just pulled her tighter, her chin resting against the top of Amina's head, her hand rubbing slow circles across her back. "You don't have to wait anymore," she said quietly. "They won't touch you again." Amina sobbed harder, and Zariah stayed right there, bruised and bleeding and calm now, because the only thing that mattered was the girl in her arms. Footsteps came from behind them, steady and deliberate. More than one pair, not rushed, but not casual either. Zariah turned her head slightly, still shielding Amina with her body, as two campus security officers approached from the main hallway. One of them held a radio in his hand, the other already reaching for the walkie clipped to his chest. They stopped a few feet away, giving the sisters space, but their posture left no doubt about why they were there. "Zariah Taylor?" one of them said. Zariah didn't move. The officer cleared his throat. "We need both of you to come with us. The principal wants to speak with you immediately." Amina tensed again, her arms clutched tighter around her sister's waist. Zariah looked up slowly, locking eyes with the man in front of her. His voice hadn't been aggressive, but it hadn't carried any understanding either. Just procedure. Just protocol. Zariah stood without a word, adjusting her grip on the wheelchair. Her expression didn't change. She didn't argue. She didn't ask why. She just nodded once, then looked down at Amina and whispered, "We're going together." And with that, she turned the chair and followed the officers down the hall. Wherever this was heading, they would face it side by side. The main office was too clean. That was the first thing Amina noticed when they wheeled inside. The floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the walls lined with laminated posters about school pride and zero-tolerance policies, as if any of that had ever protected her from what happened just minutes ago. The silence inside felt colder than the hallway they'd just come from, and somehow heavier too, like whatever was about to be said had already been decided long before they stepped through the door. Zariah didn't speak. Her breathing had slowed, but her hands still twitched now and then, like her body hadn't quite come down from everything it had just done. The security guards didn't say a word either. They led them through the front office, past curious glances from staff, and to a frosted glass door near the back. One of them knocked twice, then opened it. "Come in." Zariah pushed Amina forward into the room. Principal Langston sat behind the desk, flanked by Vice Principal Meyer, whose glasses sat crooked on the bridge of his nose and whose expression was unreadable. Both men looked serious, not shaken, not surprised, just settled, like this conversation was a formality. Zariah stood straight, hands at her sides, eyes level. Amina sat quietly beside her, trying to disappear into the cushion of her chair. Langston adjusted a file on his desk. "Zariah Taylor," he said. "Do you understand why you're here?" Zariah's reply was flat. "Because I stopped 3 boys from attacking my sister." Langston nodded slowly, as if weighing his next words. "We've reviewed video recordings from students and taken statements from staff and the students involved. I won't deny that what happened to Amina is serious. However," Meyer cut in, "however, your response was violent, prolonged. Several students have already left campus with injuries requiring medical attention. One may have a broken rib. 2 others are concussed." Zariah didn't blink. "They're lucky, that's all." Langston leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. "That's exactly the problem. We cannot have students taking matters into their own hands, no matter what the reason is." "They dragged her out of her chair," Zariah said, her voice rising slightly. "They left her on the floor like trash. And I'm the problem?" "There's a line," Meyer replied firmly, "and you crossed it." Zariah's hands curled into fists. "Because I did something you wouldn't." Langston gave her a long, measured look, then glanced at the folder again. "We've made our decision. Effective immediately, you are expelled from this school." The words landed like a weight in the room. Amina turned, eyes wide, mouth opening like she was about to protest. But no sound came out. She looked at Zariah, waiting for her to respond, to argue, to push back. And Zariah did. She stepped forward, voice tight with fury. "You're serious. You're throwing me out, while the 3 of them get to limp home, spin their story, and come back tomorrow like nothing happened." "They're being disciplined," Langston replied stiffly, "pending further review. But we can't ignore the damage done. You used excessive force because you never lifted a finger to stop them," Zariah shot back. "You ignored the warnings. You ignored her complaints. You ignored her. So I stopped waiting." "This isn't about your sister anymore," Meyer said sharply. "This is about you." Zariah gave a bitter laugh, stepping back, shaking her head. "No. This has always been about her. You just don't want to admit how fast you looked the other way." Langston stood. "You'll leave the school grounds immediately. Your parents have been notified. Security will escort you out." Amina's voice finally cracked through the tension. "No. Wait." Zariah turned to her. For a moment, the anger dropped from her face, replaced by something else, something hollow. "I'll be fine," she said softly, crouching again to meet her sister's eyes. "But you need to keep your head up now." Amina's chest was tight, her breath catching. "I don't want you to go." "I know," Zariah whispered, her voice breaking just slightly. "But they're scared of strength. That's why they're doing this. You just make sure they stay scared of yours." One of the security guards stepped inside the room. "Time to go." Zariah stood up slowly. She looked once more at the 2 men behind the desk, both of whom had turned their attention back to their papers, as if what had just happened didn't need further discussion. Then she walked out. And with every step she took, Amina felt the fear sink deeper. Because the one person who had always been there, who had always stood between her and the worst the world could offer, was gone now, and the school hadn't changed. Only the hallway had. The house was quiet when they got home, too quiet. Their mother wasn't back from work yet, and the usual background noise, the television humming low in the living room, the gentle clatter of dishes, the sound of someone moving from one room to another, was missing. Only the distant tick of the hallway clock filled the silence as Zariah helped Amina up the ramp and through the front door, careful not to jostle the chair too hard. Amina didn't say much, and Zariah didn't push her too. She just rolled her sister to the middle of the living room and crouched in front of her, resting her arms on Amina's knees, breathing slowly, her eyes searching her sister's face for something solid to hold on to. Amina looked away. Zariah followed her gaze. They sat there for a while like that, the afternoon sun spilling across the carpet, catching the specks of dust that drifted lazily through the air. Outside, someone's dog barked. A car door slammed down the street. The world kept moving. But inside, everything still felt like it was standing still. Zariah finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but not tired. "I'm sorry." Amina blinked. "What?" "I promised I'd protect you," Zariah said, her head lowered. "And now I'm not allowed within 50 feet of your school." Amina shook her head, her throat tightening. "You didn't do anything wrong." Zariah looked up again. "Didn't I? I beat the hell out of 3 kids, Amina. I gave them bruises and blood, and reasons to spin the story however they want. Now I'm the violent one, the angry one, the one they'll say snapped. And you're still stuck in there with them." Amina didn't answer right away. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her shoulders tense. She looked so small in that chair sometimes, Zariah thought. Not because of her body, but because of everything she'd been forced to carry alone, things no one her age should have to. "I'm scared," Amina whispered. Zariah didn't say anything. "I'm scared they're gonna come after me again," she continued. "Scared I won't be able to stop them. That they'll find some way to hurt me worse. And now you're not there." "No one is." Zariah moved closer, sitting down cross-legged on the carpet, knees touching the footrests. "That's not true." "They didn't believe you," Amina said. "You saw what happened. They made it like you were the problem. And if they could do that to you, what do you think they'll do to me when I go back?" Zariah leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. "They can lie in a meeting," she said. "They can hide behind desks, but they can't lie to the world." Amina looked at her, confused. Zariah's voice steadied. "The video. The one Kyle took. The one the school pretended not to have? They deleted it from his phone. But I saw 3 other kids recording. One of them posted a clip already. Just a few seconds. But it shows you on the floor. Shows them spinning the chair. I screenshotted it before it got taken down." Amina's brow furrowed. "You think someone else has the whole thing?" "I know they do," Zariah said. "And even if they don't, we have enough already to tell the truth." Amina hesitated. "And do what? Show it to Langston?" "He already made up his mind." Zariah shook her head. "Not him. Everyone else." She stood up, went to her bag by the door, and pulled out her phone. Then she brought it back and placed it gently in Amina's hands. "You're going to post it." Amina stared down at the screen. "Me? They expect you to stay quiet," Zariah said. "They expect you to cry in the corner, wait for some weak apology, maybe get an extra hall monitor for a week. But if this comes from you, if people see your face, hear your voice, they won't be able to ignore it." "Not this time." Amina's grip tightened around the phone. Her voice shook. "I don't know if I can. What if it just makes things worse?" Zariah knelt down again, leveling her gaze. "Then we fight harder." She pulled her own phone out and opened a folder. Photos, screenshots, the short video, her notes on the boys' names, a log of every incident Amina had mentioned over the last month, pieced together in careful, quiet rage. "We'll post the clip with a caption, just a few lines, then tag the local news station, the district office, the Disability Rights Foundation, maybe even the city's community group. People will see it, and once they do, they'll start asking questions Langston doesn't want to answer. Amina's eyes were glassy, but her voice didn't shake this time. And then what? Zariah reached out and placed her hand over Amina's. Then we make sure the world hears what they tried to bury. And for the first time all day, Amina nodded without hesitation. They didn't sleep much that night. Zariah sat on the edge of her bed with her laptop open, fingers typing and retouching the post over and over again, while Amina lay curled on her side in the chair beside her, a blanket wrapped around her legs, eyes wide open and unfocused, as if staring into the future they had just set in motion. They picked the cleanest footage they had. One of the students who had filmed from across the hallway had sent it through anonymously. No name, no comment, just the raw file. It was longer than the first clip, shaky but clear. The entire hallway could be seen. Amina on the floor, Brad spinning the chair, Kyle laughing, Trent walking away like it was all harmless. No audio manipulation, no cuts, just the truth, playing out in real time. Zariah added subtitles and blurred the crowd to protect the others who hadn't said a word, but might now claim they wanted to help. The caption was short. A few sentences, nothing dramatic. This is what they did to my sister. She's disabled. She asked them to stop. They didn't. I was expelled for defending her. They're still enrolled. Please share this before they make it disappear again. They posted it in the early hours of the morning. Amina hit the upload button herself, her finger hovering for half a second before tapping the screen. Her face was calm, not numb, but focused, like she had finally found a thread she could pull, and refused to let go. Zariah posted the same video on her account. They both tagged every local outlet, every organization they could think of. It was quiet at first. A few likes, a few retweets, a comment or two. Nothing big. But by the time the sun rose and the sky began to pale behind the blinds, the numbers had already started to climb. A video share from a student with a large following brought the first wave. Then a disability advocate reposted it with a sharp caption about how systems protect bullies over victims. A local journalist followed. Then another. Within hours, people from across the city were commenting, tagging the school district, demanding answers. Zariah sat beside Amina at the kitchen table, scrolling silently through the reactions. Some were angry. Some were heartbroken. Some were outraged in ways that felt like justice finally reaching its feet. Amina said little. She just kept watching the view count rise. By midday, it had passed 100,000. By evening, local news anchors were mentioning it on the air, reading statements from the district about an ongoing investigation and a review of the incident involving several students. But those words didn't carry much weight anymore. The video had already done what it needed to. The damage couldn't be softened. Their inboxes filled quickly. Messages from strangers, teachers from other schools, parents of kids in wheelchairs who had lived through the same silence. Some thanked them, some offered help. One civil rights attorney asked if they had already begun preparing legal action. Zariah flagged that message immediately. But the most telling shift came when the principal's office called. The number popped up on their mother's phone while she was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, her back still turned, still unaware of everything that had exploded online. Zariah answered. "Ms. Taylor," Langston said, his voice clipped but tight with strain. "We'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the current matter." Zariah didn't respond right away. She let the silence hang for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight shift back into her hands. "Sure," she said. "We'll be in touch. But next time, send an email. My sister doesn't need to hear your voice." She hung up before he could respond. Later that night, Amina stared at the screen as the video hit 500,000 views. Her hand drifted toward the keyboard, pausing over the words people had written about her. Brave, strong, resilient. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel strong, but she felt seen. And that was more than she'd ever had inside those school walls. Across from her, Zariah leaned back in her chair, arms folded behind her head, watching the numbers keep climbing. The fight wasn't over. Not even close, but the tide was turning. And for the first time since it began, it was the bullies who would have to answer, not them. By the next morning, the school couldn't pretend anymore. Emails flooded the district's inbox. The voicemail box for the front office filled before noon. News vans parked across the street from the school entrance, their antennas rising over rows of parked cars, cameras pointed toward students as they walked inside, hoping to catch someone willing to talk. And while the staff did their best to keep a lid on it, ushering students inside quickly, instructing teachers not to discuss the video in class, it was already too late. The damage had reached the surface. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had opinions. And no one believed the school anymore. In classrooms, students whispered during lectures, phones hidden beneath desks, fingers tapping through the endless stream of reposts, comments, and stitched videos, breaking down every second of the footage. Some spoke in low voices about how they'd seen things before, how Brad and Kyle and Trent always acted like nothing could touch them. A few even admitted quietly that they'd laughed at the time. They didn't laugh anymore. By mid-morning, a second video surfaced, this one from a different angle, showing the moments just before the assault. The way Amina had tried to wheel away, the way Brad had stepped in front of her, the smirk on his face when he leaned into the handles and unlocked the brakes. It wasn't just bullying anymore. It looked like assault. That afternoon, Zariah and Amina were called into a meeting at the district office. This time, it wasn't just Langston and Meyer behind a desk. It was a panel, representatives from the superintendent's office, a school board liaison, a district legal advisor, and one silent woman from the Department of Equity and Inclusion who said nothing the entire meeting, but took notes with a pen that never stopped moving. They sat in a quiet, windowless conference room, the walls lined with framed photos of smiling graduates and group shots from outdated school events. The contrast between those images and the tension in the room was sharp enough to taste. Langston was there too, but he didn't lead the conversation. Zariah did. She came with notes, names, timelines, incident logs, screenshots of comments, quotes from teachers who had witnessed things but never acted. She laid everything out in calm, measured words, her voice never shaking, her posture never folding. And beside her, Amina sat still in her chair, silent but present, her eyes focused on every person at the table, like she was seeing through the polished wood and rehearsed sympathy. "You expelled me for protecting my sister," Zariah said, her voice even. "And you let her walk back into that school the next day with the same boys who pulled her out of her chair. You didn't review footage. You didn't speak to her. You didn't do anything except punish the person who made you look bad." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "We understand that mistakes were made, and we're conducting a full review." "You're not reviewing anything," Zariah interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You're reacting because you got caught, because the world saw what you refused to see." The silence afterward was thick and long. Then the legal advisor spoke. "We've reviewed the footage and documentation provided. We've also spoken to additional students. Based on the full scope of the incident, the district is issuing an official apology to both Amina and Zariah Taylor. The expulsion will be reversed immediately, and the disciplinary actions against the other students are being re-evaluated." Zariah leaned back slowly, her hands folded across her lap. "Re-evaluated isn't good enough." The board member cleared her throat. "We're in the process of formal expulsion hearings for all 3 students involved." "And what about the staff who ignored the warnings?" Zariah asked. "We've opened an internal review," the legal advisor said, "and we are revisiting our training programs for disability awareness and intervention. It wasn't everything. Not yet. but it was the first time anyone in that room had acknowledged what happened in full. Amina didn't speak during the meeting, but when it ended and the room began to clear, the woman from Equity and Inclusion stood beside her and said, "They only move this fast when they're afraid." And for the first time since it started, Amina smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't long, but it was real. Outside the building, reporters stood waiting, microphones in hand, cameras rolling, and this time, Zoraya didn't flinch when they called her name. She stepped in front of the lenses with her chin high, Amina by her side, and spoke with the same clarity she had in that meeting. She didn't rage, she didn't cry, she just told the truth. And when the story aired that night, on every local channel, across social media, through articles and interviews and panel discussions, the message was clear. They weren't just fighting back. They were winning. But that didn't last forever. It didn't take long for the pushback to start. By the end of the week, after the district issued its formal apology and confirmed that the expulsion against Zoraya had been rescinded, local talk radio began to shift. The tone was different now. Not all outrage and sympathy, but something quieter, more calculating. Callers framed their concerns in vague terms, their voices laced with hesitation, meant to sound fair. "Now, I'm not saying what happened to that girl wasn't terrible," one man said on a popular morning segment, "but I just wonder, at what point does violence go too far? I mean, that other girl sent 3 boys to the hospital." A mother chimed in later that day, her voice tight, controlled, the kind of tone used when someone rehearses every word before stepping in front of a microphone. "My son Kyle has never been a bully. He was caught in a moment. That girl had training. She's a fighter. Why isn't anyone asking if what she did was excessive?" Others followed. Letters to the editor, online comments under news stories, carefully worded statements from the parents of the boys involved, crafted by lawyers and public relations coaches and framed with language that danced around accountability. They didn't deny what happened. They didn't apologize for it either. They just redirected the spotlight, away from their sons and onto Zoraya. A few of the articles began referring to her as the expelled MMA student, rather than by name. Anonymous sources mentioned her violent background. One blog claimed she'd attacked before, though no one could prove it. The implication was clear. Maybe Amina was a victim, but Zoraya, she was dangerous. Zoraya read every headline. She didn't flinch, but Amina noticed the way her sister stayed up later now, scrolling through articles on her phone, fingers clenched, jaw tight. She noticed how Zoraya stopped posting for a few days, how she pulled away when friends texted, how she said she was fine, but walked around like she was waiting for something else to hit her. It hit Amina harder, because while Zoraya had always been the one who fought, who stood tall and took the heat, Amina knew the toll it took to be misunderstood by choice, to be turned into something ugly by people who never looked you in the eye. They were doing it again, just with bigger words, louder platforms, cleaner suits. At school, a few students started wearing red wristbands, a color tied to the varsity team, a quiet show of support for Brad and the others. A few muttered things in passing. One boy said Zoraya got lucky that she wasn't behind bars. Another laughed and said Amina should be thankful anyone talked to her at all. None of them touched her. But the air had changed. The principal sent out a memo reminding students to treat each other with compassion and to avoid taking sides during what he called a delicate and polarizing situation. Zoraya tore it off the bulletin board when she saw it and tossed it into the trash. "They want a clean ending," she told Amina that night. "They want it quiet, a nice little press conference and a lesson learned, and everyone goes back to class like it never happened." Amina looked up at her. "But it did happen." Zoraya nodded. "That's why they're scared. Because we're not letting them wrap it up." The next morning, a legal filing went public. Amina Taylor versus the District Board of Education. A civil suit alleging failure to protect a disabled student, willful negligence, and systemic inaction toward repeated harassment. The attorney who had messaged them after the first video had filed it on their behalf. Zoraya didn't speak during the press interview. She stood behind her sister, hands folded, face steady. Amina did the talking now. Slowly, carefully, clearly. She told the room that it wasn't about revenge, that it wasn't about attention, that all she wanted was safety, fairness, and dignity. That she hadn't had those things since the moment her chair became a target. After the interview, reporters crowded around again. Some of them asked about the wristbands, about the new rumors, about the pushback from the boys' families. Amina answered the same way every time. I can't walk away, so I won't back down either. And in that moment, even as the spin machines turned and the parents scrambled to protect their sons' images, it was clear that something had shifted for good. Because now, it wasn't just Zoraya who fought, it was Amina too. It happened outside the district building 3 days after the lawsuit was filed. The weather had turned colder, the wind sharper around the edges, and the sky hung gray overhead like it hadn't decided whether to rain or just make the city feel heavier. Amina and Zoraya had just finished a short meeting with their lawyer. Updates, nothing urgent, when they stepped outside into the small parking lot tucked behind the building. The cars were lined up tight, boxed between a chain-link fence and a row of sagging hedges. That's where she saw them. Brad and his father. The boy stood stiff near the passenger side of a black SUV, hands stuffed in the pockets of a varsity jacket he hadn't earned back yet, his face pale but tight, with something that looked like anger stretched too thin to hold itself together. His father leaned against the hood of the car, tall and broad, a thick-necked man with salt and pepper stubble and a suit jacket worn like armor. His arms were crossed, his jaw set hard. The kind of man used to getting his way with a voice raised in the right room. Zoraya slowed, but Amina didn't. She wheeled forward, not fast, not reckless, just steady, and when she came to a stop about 10 feet from them, she didn't flinch. Her hands rested lightly on the rims. Her expression was calm. Brad's father stepped forward first. "You think you're clever," he said, his voice flat, the kind of tone meant to fill space like pressure. "Dragging my son's name through the mud, spinning stories to ruin his future. You think anyone's going to remember the truth after you've poisoned it this way?" Amina tilted her head, her eyes steady. "I'm not the one spinning anything." He took a step closer. "You don't understand what kind of damage you're doing." Behind him, Brad stayed silent. Zoraya moved closer, her posture guarded, every step measured. But Amina raised a hand gently, signaling her to hold back. Then she looked straight at Brad. "You brought your daddy to yell at me?" she said, her voice soft but clear. "Wasn't brave enough to do it yourself?" His eyes flickered. His father's expression hardened. "You're out of your depth, little girl." Amina smiled, slow and sharp. "I've been dragged across floors, left on the ground, mocked by people who thought I'd stay quiet forever. And I still came back. I'm not out of my depth. I'm just out of patience." He stepped closer. Zoraya moved to intercept, but Amina didn't move. "You think this is strength?" he asked, low and hard. "Sitting in a chair behind a lawsuit?" Amina's voice didn't waver. "No, I think strength is sitting in a chair and still making people like you nervous." For a moment, no one moved. Then Brad's father looked away, just briefly, like the words had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. Behind him, Brad's jaw twitched. His mouth pressed into a thin line, but he still didn't speak. He didn't step forward. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, shadowed by the man who had clearly taught him how to fight only when the odds were stacked in his favor. Amina leaned forward slightly in her chair. "I'm not scared of you," she said. "And if you think showing up here's gonna stop me from telling the truth, you really don't understand who you're dealing with." The man stared for a moment longer, then glanced over at Zoraya. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him pause. He stepped back without another word, nodded to his son, and turned toward the car. Brad followed. He glanced back once, just for a second, But Amina had already turned away. By the time the SUV pulled out of the lot and disappeared around the corner, the wind had picked up, tugging at the edges of her coat and rustling the dry leaves that skittered across the asphalt. Zariah stood beside her in silence. "You okay?" she asked finally. Amina nodded, eyes forward. "I'm just tired of people thinking they can scare me." Zariah gave a quiet laugh under her breath. "They're scared," she said. "That's why they showed up." And neither of them said it out loud, but they both felt it, deep and certain, like a wire pulled tight between them. This wasn't the end, but it was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight they were starting to control. By the following week, things stopped being manageable. The school's strategy of silence, of controlled statements, deflective language, and shallow gestures no longer worked. Every time they tried to issue a neutral press release, it was torn apart in the comment sections, dissected by local news panels, mocked on social media. Every delay looked like guilt. Every carefully worded sentence that failed to name the boys directly was seen for what it was: cowardice wrapped in bureaucracy. But it wasn't just the video anymore. A new recording surfaced, this one older. Grainy audio from a classroom, posted anonymously, but it was unmistakably Brad's voice, laughing, calling Amina dead weight under his breath, while another boy whispered something too low to hear, followed by stifled laughter. A teacher had clearly been in the room, but said nothing. You could hear the dry erase marker squeaking on the board in the background while it all happened. The clip spread faster than the first, because now it wasn't just the cruelty. It was the cover-up. People started speaking out. A former student posted a long thread about how she'd been harassed her senior year, and the school had investigated but told her not to ruin anyone's future. Another mentioned Kyle getting caught with a bottle of liquor in his gym bag and walking out of detention 2 days later with no mark on his record. A boy shared that Trent had broken his glasses in the locker room during freshman year, and the coach told him not to report it unless he wanted to stir the pot. It was all coming loose. And the boys' families knew it. The lawyer representing the Taylors received an unexpected call, an offer for early settlement, with no admission of wrongdoing, but a promise to discuss financial compensation and systemic reform. The number they floated was large. Enough to tempt silence, enough to make everything disappear, at least publicly. But Zariah and Amina weren't interested in vanishing. Their lawyer turned it down. Instead, she went public with the fact that a settlement offer had been made without accountability. That same evening, a televised debate aired between two legal analysts, one of whom read a portion of the offer aloud on air. The backlash was swift. Parents from the school began calling for administrative resignations. A petition demanding the firing of Vice Principal Meyer reached 25,000 signatures in a single weekend. Disability rights organizations began planning a rally in front of the school district building. Reporters now waited daily outside campus. And in the middle of it all, Amina stayed steady. She went to class every day. She spoke when asked. She gave a short interview for a national podcast. She answered a question at a town hall. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't retreat. She just kept showing up. Zariah, reinstated but choosing not to return to the school, kept working behind the scenes, organizing interviews, sending statements, coordinating with advocacy groups who were now treating Amina as a figurehead in a growing movement far beyond their city. For every headline the boys' families tried to control, Zariah made sure a louder, truer one replaced it. One evening, Amina sat at the table scrolling through her phone when she saw a new post. A boy from school, one of the quiet ones who had never said a word during all the bullying, had posted a short video of himself staring into the camera. "I should have helped her," he said. "I saw what they did. I didn't do anything. But now I'm going to." He shared the link to the petition. He tagged the district. He named Brad. Amina didn't know how to feel at first, but when she looked across the table and saw Zariah watching her, the corner of her sister's mouth lifting into something small and proud, she realized something simple but powerful. They were being heard, not because they begged for attention, not because they played nice, but because they didn't stop. And now the truth had a momentum of its own. It was no longer just about what had been done. It was about what came next. The change came slowly, then all at once. It started with the hearing notices, letters sent to the families of Brad, Kyle, and Trent, informing them that formal expulsion procedures had begun. The school board had voted unanimously to move forward after reviewing the compiled evidence, witness statements, and public outcry. The district made the announcement in a short press release, released just before the weekend, to soften the impact. But the news didn't soften anything. Reporters got the story before the school could control it. Within hours, headlines flooded local and regional outlets. School moves to expel students involved in disability abuse incident. Photos of the boys from last year's sports banquet began circulating online. In some, they looked smug, arms around each other's shoulders, trophies in hand. In others, they looked younger, almost harmless, but the captions under the images told a different story now. The comment sections weren't kind, and while their parents still tried to spin it, interviewing through lawyers, issuing statements about due process and forgiveness, the community had turned. Coaches distanced themselves. Alumni stopped defending them. Even some of the teachers who had been silent started quietly voicing support for what the Taylors had done, as if the winds had shifted just enough to make truth feel safe to stand beside. For the first time since the fight, Amina felt like she could breathe inside those school walls. The tension didn't vanish completely. There were still stares in the hallway, whispers that trailed behind her, classmates who avoided eye contact or spoke too carefully, like the truth might still be radioactive, but the fear had changed shape. It wasn't lodged in her chest the way it had been before. It didn't grip her hands when she turned corners, or sit on her shoulders when she passed certain lockers. It had moved. To them. Brad stopped coming to school 2 days before his hearing. No explanation. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. Kyle and Trent followed soon after. Their lockers were emptied one morning before the first bell. Someone said their parents had requested early withdrawals. Someone else said they'd been told not to show up. The principal released another statement. Short, cautious. We remain committed to a safe learning environment for all students. We take allegations of harassment seriously and will continue to uphold our policies. It sounded tired now, too late. Zariah read it and didn't even bother to respond. Instead, she focused on preparing for the next step. The lawsuit was gaining traction. National organizations had started calling. Disability rights leaders wanted to meet Amina. Civil rights groups were amplifying the story. A local university invited the sisters to speak at an upcoming panel on equity in education. Their mother sat them down at the kitchen table one evening after dinner. Her voice calm but firm. "You've already changed things," she said, "and I'm proud of both of you. But just make sure you're still living your lives. Don't let this take everything." Zariah nodded, serious as always. But Amina just smiled. "Maybe it already did," she said. "But now we're the ones deciding what to do with it." That weekend, Amina returned to the gym where Zariah trained. It had been a long time since she'd watched her sister move like that. Controlled, sharp, deliberate. Zariah sparred carefully, never showing off, but always steady, always precise. After the session ended, she handed Amina a pair of gloves, smaller, padded, soft. "You don't have to hit hard," she said. "Just hit smart." Amina slipped them on. The weight didn't scare her anymore, because now she understood what it meant to stand your ground, even when you were sitting. The rally took place on a cold Saturday morning, just outside the district headquarters. And by the time Amina and Zariah arrived, wrapped in coats and scarves against the wind, the sidewalk was already filled. Signs bobbed above heads in steady rhythm. Protect disabled students. We stand with Amina. Accountability isn't optional. Some were handwritten, others printed by local organizations who had shown up not just to support, but to demand. There were parents and students, activists and teachers, legal advocates and neighbors, all gathered in a quiet but powerful show of force, their presence speaking what their voices soon would. At the edge of the gathering, a makeshift podium had been set up near the front steps of the building. Behind it, a banner stretched across the stone wall. No more silence. No more excuses. Zariah stepped up first, her voice calm and measured, cutting through the cold without needing to shout. She spoke about schools as institutions of trust, how they could no longer expect students to endure harm in silence, while adults turned away. She spoke about systems that only moved when forced, and the strength it took to be the one doing the pushing. Then she stepped back, and Amina wheeled forward. She didn't look at the crowd first. She took a slow breath, her hands resting on the podium, steady and sure. Then she raised her eyes and spoke, not loud, not theatrical, just clear, like she was no longer asking permission to be heard. I didn't file a lawsuit because I wanted revenge, she said. I filed it because I didn't want this to happen to the next girl in the chair, or the next boy, or anyone who gets laughed at and ignored until they finally break. The crowd was quiet, listening. I filed it, she continued, because no one should have to get hurt, get filmed, get dragged across the floor and still wonder if they'll be believed. No one should have to lose their sister from school just to get someone to notice. Applause didn't explode. It rolled in like a rising tide, steady and strong, carrying warmth in its sound. She paused only briefly before finishing. And I'm not going anywhere until the people who failed me are the ones who have to answer for it. That night, her words were quoted on the evening news, and the lawsuit became national. Within days, media coverage spread far beyond the city. Major outlets published features with headlines like Student Files Landmark Disability Discrimination Case Against School District and Sisters at the Center of Civil Rights Storm Refused to Back Down. Interviews were requested from national talk shows. A segment aired on a late-night special. The legal filing itself, Taylor v. District Board of Education, was circulated in advocacy networks, used as an example of how accountability could no longer be buried under red tape and silence. The district's lawyers tried to get ahead of the damage. They reached out again with a revised settlement offer, but this time it wasn't buried in disclaimers. It included a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a detailed action plan to reform staff training, and a substantial financial offer that would fund both Amina's continued care and a new disability equity program that would bear her name. This time, the Taylors listened. Their attorney went through the offer carefully. Zariah asked every question she could think of. Amina said nothing for most of the meeting, just sat quietly, watching her name printed across the paperwork, the shape of her story now etched into official documents. "I'll agree," she finally said, "if they sign it in public." The attorney smiled, and the district did. The final agreement was signed in a public session, not behind closed doors. Cameras were allowed. Journalists attended. The superintendent read a statement acknowledging the district's failure to protect Amina Taylor from sustained harassment and abuse, recognizing Zariah Taylor for stepping in when adults had failed and committing to long-term systemic reform. It wasn't just a win, it was a shift. And afterward, Amina didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She just sat with her sister on the front steps of the building, the crowd thinning behind them, reporters drifting away, the sky softening to a pale gray as the day settled down. Zariah handed her a bottled water and sat beside her in silence. "You did it," Zariah said quietly. Amina shook her head, just slightly. "We did it," And while neither of them said it out loud, both understood the same thing in that moment. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about what came next, what they'd build with the space they'd carved out, and how many more would follow the path they'd forced open. The dust never settled completely, but it did begin to clear. The news cycle moved on after a while, shifting its spotlight to another city, another story. The cameras left the school parking lot, the reporters stopped calling as often, and the comment threads grew quieter. But for Amina, the silence wasn't the kind that erased what happened. It was the kind that made space for something new to take root. She still wheeled down the same hallways, past the same lockers, sat through the same classes. But the weight had changed. It no longer pressed against her shoulders or curled in her stomach like it used to. People still watched her sometimes, but the looks were different now. Curious, careful, even respectful in a way that didn't feel forced. A few students who had never spoken before now stopped her to ask questions about advocacy projects. Some asked about joining the mentorship group she was building with the help of a local nonprofit. One teacher asked if she'd be willing to help redesign parts of the school's disability access plan. They wanted to hear from her, not out of pity, but because they had started to understand she knew what they didn't. She hadn't expected to enjoy that feeling, but she did. She liked the planning, the clarity, the way ideas took shape on paper and turned into something real. She liked knowing that her voice could shift a conversation, change a policy, open a door. For the first time since the accident, she felt useful in a way that wasn't just about surviving the day. She wasn't clinging to the edge of things anymore. She was building something inside them. And she wasn't alone. Zariah kept showing up, not at school, but everywhere else that mattered. She trained in the mornings and helped Amina in the afternoons. They met with community organizers. They drafted proposals. They planned summer workshops. It wasn't always easy, but it was theirs. Every meeting, every late-night email, every small win, they were stitching something back together. Something stronger than what had been lost. One afternoon, as they sat at the kitchen table sorting through a stack of notes and program flyers, their mother stepped into the room holding her phone. She looked at Amina, then gently placed the phone down with the screen facing up. A headline stretched across it in bold black text. 3 former students disqualified from university admissions following expulsion review. Amina read it slowly. Beneath the title, the article explained how the colleges Brad, Kyle, and Trent had been accepted to had rescinded their offers after learning of the full extent of the harassment and the terms of their expulsion. Their athletic scholarships had been pulled. At least one of the boys had tried to appeal, citing unfair media influence. But the decision held. There were no photos in the article, no quotes from the boys or their families, just the facts, laid out plain and final. Amina stared at the screen for a long time. Zariah didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Eventually, Amina looked up. "I thought it would feel different," she said softly. "Does it?" her mother asked. "I don't know," Amina said. "It doesn't feel like revenge, just like the end of a chapter." Zariah nodded. That's all it ever needed to be. They sat there a while longer, not celebrating, not gloating, just letting it settle. The weight of justice, when it finally landed, didn't come with fireworks or shouts. It came quiet, steady, heavy in the right places. Later that evening, Amina wheeled out to the back porch with a blanket wrapped around her legs and a notebook in her lap. She scribbled notes for the next meeting, topics for discussion, speakers to invite, questions she wanted to ask. The porch light buzzed above her. The wind was cool, but not bitter. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was chasing after a version of her life she had lost. She felt like she was finally living the one she had grown into. And it didn't scare her anymore. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.